Imagine hiring a doctor to save your life. You pay them millions. You give them access to everything, your records, your history, your most private vulnerabilities. You trust them completely because their reputation is flawless and their fees suggest they must know something nobody else does. And then years later, you find out that while they were treating you, they were also consulting for the disease. That's not a metaphor. That is functionally what McKinsey Company has done, repeatedly, across industries, across continents, across decades. They walked into the boardrooms of America's biggest companies carrying leather briefcases and Ivy League credentials and a reputation so powerful that just hiring them sent a signal to Wall Street that you were serious, that you had a plan, that the adults were in the room. And in some of those rooms, they were right. They gave solid advice. Companies improved, strategies sharpened. But in other rooms that history has now fully lit up, McKinsey didn't save the company. They extracted it. And by the time the executives realized what had happened, the fees were paid, the consultants were gone, and the wreckage was left for someone else to explain. This is the story of the most powerful consulting firm in the world. What they built, what they broke, and why, despite everything, they are still operating today, still charging millions, still walking into the most sensitive rooms in business and government on the planet. Stay with this, because the further in you go, the more uncomfortable it gets.
McKinsey's influence in business is virtually unparalleled.
The most prestigious consulting firm in the world.
They've got the world in their hands.
To understand what McKinsey became, you have to understand what McKinsey was supposed to be. Founded in 1926 by James O. McKinsey, a University of Chicago accounting professor, with a vision that was genuinely radical for its time, that businesses could be managed scientifically, that the chaos of corporate decision-making could be replaced with rigor, analysis, and structured thinking. It was a serious idea, and for decades, it produced serious results. McKinsey helped shape the modern management playbook. They advised presidents and prime ministers. They built frameworks that business schools still teach. They recruited the sharpest graduates from the sharpest universities and trained them inside a culture that valued discretion above almost everything. That discretion was the brand. McKinsey didn't advertise. McKinsey didn't brag. McKinsey operated in the background, behind NDAs and closed doors, in the quiet spaces where the real decisions were made. And that secrecy, that deliberate invisibility, made them more powerful, not less. Because what happens in the shadows carries a weight that daylight never gives you. But here's the question that starts pulling at everything. When a firm this powerful, this secretive, this deeply embedded in the financial and political infrastructure of the modern world starts making decisions that hurt the very companies paying them, is it incompetence? Or is it something else? Here's what McKinsey actually sells. Not answers. Confidence. When a struggling company hires McKinsey, it's not primarily buying a strategy document. They're buying a story they can tell their board, their shareholders, their regulators. A story that says, we brought in the best people, we did the analysis, and this is what the data says we should do. McKinsey gives decisions a kind of institutional armor. And for decades, that armor was worth the price. Because if a strategy failed, the company could point to the report. The consultant said so. We followed the process. But that armor had a crack in it that almost nobody talked about publicly. McKinsey's business model creates a structural conflict that is almost impossible to resolve honestly. They advise competitors simultaneously. They advise regulators and the industries those regulators oversee. They advise governments on policy and the private companies that profit from that policy. And because of their confidentiality agreements, none of these clients know who else is in the room. A McKinsey partner could be sitting across the table from your CEO on Monday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, be in a different city, advising the company that is about to eat your lunch, using not necessarily the documents, but the pattern recognition, the industry map, the competitive intelligence that only comes from being inside both organizations at the same time. This isn't illegal. That's the part that should stop you cold. It isn't illegal. But let's move past the theoretical and into the documented. because there is one chapter in McKinsey's history that is not a conflict of interest argument or a philosophical debate about consulting ethics. It is a factual, court-documented, settlement-confirmed disaster that contributed to one of the worst public health crises in American history, the opioid epidemic. Between roughly 2004 and 2019, McKinsey was a paid consultant to Purdue Pharma, the company that manufactured and aggressively marketed OxyContin. And what McKinsey helped Purdue do was not refine their supply chain or optimize their org chart. They helped turbocharge the sales machine. Internal documents revealed through litigation showed McKinsey consultants developing strategies to, in their own framed language, supercharge OxyContin sales, to push harder into markets, to counter the growing resistance from doctors and pharmacists who were becoming uncomfortable with how many prescriptions were going out. One McKinsey presentation, which became central to the legal proceedings, reportedly included a discussion of ways to get distributors to push higher doses to more patients. This was happening while overdose deaths were climbing, while emergency rooms were filling up, while families were burying people. In 2021, McKinsey agreed to pay nearly $600 million across settlements with U.S. states over its role in the opioid crisis. Let that land. $600 million to make the lawsuits go away, with no admission of wrongdoing. No admission of wrongdoing. Here's where it gets interesting, and I mean that in the way that makes your stomach drop. The opioid settlement was not an isolated incident. Pull back the camera, look at the longer list, and a pattern starts to emerge that is either the most astonishing run of bad luck in consulting history or something that demands a harder question. Enron. McKinsey consultants were deeply embedded in Enron's strategy during the years it was building the financial architecture that would eventually collapse into one of the largest corporate frauds in American history. McKinsey's then managing director, Jeff Skilling, who went from McKinsey to Enron CEO, was central to the company's direction. He was later convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Swissair. McKinsey advised the Swiss national airline on an expansion strategy in the late 1990s. The strategy was called the Hunter concept, aggressive acquisition of smaller European carriers to build scale. McKinsey reportedly billed tens of millions for the work. Swissair followed the strategy. By 2001, one of the most financially conservative airlines in the world had grounded its entire fleet because it couldn't pay its fuel bills. It collapsed completely. General Electric. For decades, McKinsey helped shape GE's corporate strategy, including the aggressive financial engineering under Jack Welch that made the company look, for years, like the most well-managed corporation on Earth. GE Capital grew to become so large that it nearly took the parent company down during the 2008 financial crisis. The stock lost more than 70% of its value over the following decade. The company that McKinsey helped build into a symbol of American corporate excellence had to be dismantled, piece by piece, to survive. The pattern isn't that McKinsey gives bad advice. The pattern is that McKinsey gives advice that produces short-term results, collects its fees at the peak of the short term, and is gone before the long term arrives. Now, here's the part that most business documentaries stop short of saying directly. McKinsey doesn't just advise corporations, they advise governments. And when you start mapping out the full scope of McKinsey's government work, who they've advised, in which countries, at what moments, the picture that emerges is not reassuring. In South Africa, a McKinsey subsidiary became entangled in what investigators later described as one of the most significant corruption scandals in the country's post-apartheid history. The firm eventually agreed to return approximately $100 million in fees it had earned through work connected to state-owned enterprises that were at the center of the scandal. In Saudi Arabia, McKinsey was hired to help the government identify critics of the regime. A report the firm produced, which mapped the social media networks of dissidents, was reportedly used by Saudi authorities. 3 of the individuals identified in that social media analysis were later arrested. One of them had family ties to Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was murdered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. McKinsey denied any connection between their work and what happened afterward, but the architecture was there. And here is the open question that I want you to sit with, because we'll come back to it before this is over. If a consulting firm is simultaneously advising governments that suppress dissent and corporations that lobby those same governments for favorable regulation, who exactly is the client? To understand why McKinsey has survived all of this, why the scandals haven't accumulated into consequences, you have to understand the most ingenious thing the firm ever built. It's not a consulting framework. It's not a proprietary database. It's an alumni network. McKinsey has, for decades, operated on a model called up or out. You either advance within the firm or you leave. And the ones who leave don't go quietly into normal careers. They go to the top. McKinsey alumni run Fortune 500 companies. They lead central banks. They become cabinet secretaries. They run international organizations. They get appointed to regulatory bodies that oversee the very industries McKinsey advises. This isn't conspiracy, it's design. When your former consultants are sitting in the chairs that decide whether your firm faces consequences, not because of any explicit arrangement, but simply because of shared culture, shared language, shared professional identity, you don't need to buy influence. You've already installed it. And when a scandal breaks, when the settlements come, when the headlines run for a few weeks, the institutional infrastructure that might hold another firm genuinely accountable is populated at its most senior levels by people who once sat in McKinsey conference rooms and learned the same playbook. This is not a bug in McKinsey's model. This is the model. Now, and this matters because intellectual honesty demands it, let's steelman the other side. There are serious people who will tell you that McKinsey's critics are selective, that the firm's failures get amplified while its successes go unexamined, and that the nature of consulting means you're always operating with incomplete information inside someone else's organization. That's not nothing. McKinsey has advised companies that succeeded, transformations that worked, public health initiatives in developing countries that genuinely improved outcomes, government efficiency projects that saved taxpayer money. Some of the most competent operational minds in the world have passed through that firm and done real, useful work. The question is not whether McKinsey is capable of good work. The question is whether a firm with this much embedded power, this many simultaneous conflicts, and this consistent a pattern of arriving just before disaster and leaving just after should be operating with this level of access and this level of immunity. Because that combination, capability plus impunity, is the most dangerous thing in any institution. Not incompetence, not malice. Capability plus impunity. So let's bring it back to where we started. The doctor, the patient, the disease. McKinsey is not a villain in the cartoon sense. There's no single moment of evil, no mustache-twirling executive who decided one morning to destroy the companies paying them. What McKinsey is, what the documented record now shows, is something more structurally dangerous than a villain. It is a firm that built a system in which the incentives never fully aligned with the outcomes. Consulting firms get paid for the engagement, not the result. McKinsey's fees come in when the strategy is delivered, not when the strategy works, not when the employees keep their jobs, not when the company is still standing in 5 years. The deck was always arranged so that McKinsey won whether the advice worked or not. And when you remove the consequence from the advice, when the advisor goes home rich regardless of what happens to the advised, you have not hired a doctor. You have hired someone in a doctor's coat. And the companies that figured that out too late are the ones that didn't make it to the other side. Swiss Air, grounded. Enron, convicted. Purdue Pharma, dissolved. The people who trusted the firm, the workers, the patients, the communities, they didn't get settlements. They didn't get immunity agreements. They got the wreckage. And McKinsey? McKinsey is still there. Still in the boardrooms. Still behind the NDAs. Still advising the most sensitive organizations on the planet. Still charging millions. Still not admitting wrongdoing. The most powerful consulting firm in history has survived everything thrown at it, not because it is innocent and not because it is untouchable, but because the system it operates inside was partly built by the people it trained. And that is a problem that a settlement cannot solve. The real question this story leaves you with isn't, is McKinsey evil? It's, who else is operating on the same model? Because the next boardroom that hires the wrong firm in a moment of crisis, the next government that opens its books to advisors with competing loyalties, might not make the news, but somebody will pay. If this video made you think differently about who actually holds power in the corporate world, Subscribe now. This channel is built for exactly this kind of story. The ones where the real action happens in the rooms you were never meant to see inside. More coming. You'll want to be there for them.